Hey guys, welcome to Bethel Online. My name is Jason. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're so glad you decided to make us a part of your weekend. No matter who you are, where you come from, we're so glad you're here. Our vision is to be a safe place for real people to encounter the real Jesus and experience real change. Our hope and our prayer is that no matter who you are or what you've been through, you know that you are loved and you are wanted here. We would love to get to know you better and help you connect with all that's going on. You can do this by going to our website at www.bethel.us or by downloading the Bethel app. You can find our app by searching Bethel Putco in your app store. Both online and in the app, you can fill out digital connection card. It only takes a minute and it'll help us know how to serve you better. Another way you can connect today is through giving. Your generosity at Bethel directly impacts God's mission to radically change people's lives in Putnam County and beyond. Through the ministries of Bethel and the many local and regional organizations we support, people are able to see the grace of God and how much He loves them. You can always give on our website at bethel.us/give or in the Bethel app. Thank you for partnering with us and making a difference. Well, thanks again for tuning in online today. Know that you are wanted and welcome here, and you are loved. I hope you all have a great day.
Have you ever had something in your life that just didn't seem to make sense? You couldn't figure it out with everything that you knew. You lived through it for a long time. Maybe it was an illness that you went through or a trauma that you experienced, but you went through it, and in your mind, and even to this day, it's hard for you to understand the purpose of it. But then as you get around people, sometimes you find out that when people look at your situation from a distance, they can often make some assumptions about it. And they can often seem to make sense and simplify something that's really complex. And they'll say, well, this had to be, maybe you'll tell your story and they'll say, well, maybe it happened because of this. And you'll be like, wow, that's a really simple approach to it, but it doesn't solve what I've gone through or the confusion that it cost me. Sometimes it's hard to see the vision for the rest of our life when we're dealing with something really blinding right in front of us. Today's story is a story of when Jesus comes around a man who has been blinded by birth. There were expectations and ideas about why he may have been blinded. In his culture, someone would have come to the assumption maybe that his mom or dad had done something wrong and that was God's punishment. Someone would have maybe come to the conclusion that there was something bad about him and that caused it. And the reality is there's never really given much clarity about the exact purpose of this man's issues, but there are certainly people around with ideas. The story begins in John chapter 9. And it says, as Jesus went along, he saw a blind man from birth. Now, Jesus is at a stage of his ministry in which people are following him. The religious teachers and the lawmakers are checking out everything he does, trying to decide what they think about him. There's a crowd because after all, Jesus is doing some pretty cool things, and there's a crowd that's drawn to see the cool things. His disciples are around because they're trying to figure out what it really means to follow him and learn as he's their rabbi, and they're just trying to learn. And it says as he went along, like Jesus had a lot going on, but he saw a man blind from birth. I find it interesting that a man who otherwise might have been ignored or missed, Jesus sees. Many times we go through struggles in our life and we feel unseen and unknown, but you can know that Jesus sees people just like you. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They had a simpler view of this event. Maybe none of them had been blinded by birth, but they had probably been taught some things about blindness. They had probably been taught some ideas from their own people, and they asked Jesus, like, what's the deal here? Like, why was he born blind? Like, did his dad do something? Did his grandpa do something 2 generations ago, and this is the punishment for what he did? Is there something wrong with him? Why is, and I don't think this is a bad question of his disciples. You know what scares me? when God's people stop asking questions. The most scary followers of Christ that I know, and the most damaging followers to Christ that I know, are the know-it-alls that seem to believe they know everything about everything. The one leader I would never trust is a leader who pretends to know everything. As a matter of fact, a leader we're following will always be willing to say, I don't know. I'm not sure. The disciples here, they just don't know and they're not sure. So they ask Jesus, like, why is this man blind? And Jesus' response is, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Now this has to throw a kink into their thinking that everything is an X plus Y sort of equation. It had to have thrown a kink into the ideas of the day when Jesus says, no, it has nothing to do with that. But this happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. Can we just be honest? If you're the blind man here, that's probably not very comforting. Yeah, it is good when we've struggled or we have gone through a trauma or we've had an illness, or it's good to know that God can use it for his good, but it's also bad to deal with when you're dealing with it. It doesn't ease the pain of what you experienced. And it says, and Jesus says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. Now the reality is, it's the Sabbath day. It's the day of rest, the day in which not even supposed to be going very far without it being considered work. And Jesus is a rabbi, the example of holiness and righteousness, the example of perfection. And the Pharisees were going to be very unhappy about what Jesus was doing on the Sabbath. But Jesus is pointing out that there's a limited amount of time to do what I've been brought here to do. And Jesus says, while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. Jesus is implying here that the blind man isn't the only one in the dark. The reality is there's some confusion in the disciples yet that Jesus has to bring his light to. Some ideas that they've been trained up in ways they've been trained up to think, and Jesus is going to bring light to that. There are some Pharisees in which they've got their eyes closed to who he might be, even though he's right in front of them, because they have their own ideas about what he should be. After saying this, Jesus spit on the ground and made some mud with saliva and put it in the man's eyes. Now, you've heard the phrase putting salt in a person's wounds, right? But Jesus does something here that is so complex and yet so simple. Jesus spits on the ground, made mud with the saliva. What Jesus does here is break a religious rule. Not a commandment, but a religious rule. The religious people had begun making it so difficult to do a good thing based upon the laws that they had made up, that they had made rules like you couldn't mix clay on the Sabbath, or it would be considered work. You couldn't even go on a long walk, or it would have been considered work. When Jesus spits on the ground and makes mud with saliva, he basically breaks the religious people's law that are in his presence and puts it on the man's eyes. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're blind, you can't be more blind than blind. But if it's possible, you would be covered with darkness the way that mud would cover your eyes. And he puts it on the man's eyes. Isn't it interesting that Jesus uses something that would have been unclean considering the source to do something in order to heal someone? Jesus said after he puts the mud on the man's eyes, notice that there's no moment of the man saying, "Oh, you've healed me." Jesus then instructs the man to go. Here he is. Can you imagine? Blinded by life, by his whole life, struggling to get around. Jesus sends him off on a journey. Can you imagine the faith that it would take after having fallen over things your whole life to now have your face covered with dirt and mud and being told to go wash in the pool of Siloam. It's the pool. And see, there's never a meeting that we have with Jesus that he will not send us with a purpose afterwards. So the man went and he washed and he came home seeing. Get the gravity of this moment. Here's a man never knew what it was to see, never knew what to even expect, had probably hoped to be healed before, had probably had people promise that they would help him before. And now it probably feels like this may just be another disappointment. And he goes and he has this moment where he washes and he comes home visibly seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed he was. Others said, "No, it only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." So he's experienced this incredible healing, and yet there are people who are denying the healing that happened to him. "How then were your eyes open?" they asked. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now this man has just been freed from a life of blindness. And the blinded religious people of his day decide they're going to bring him to the Pharisees, who are supposed to be the judge of what is righteous, holy, good, or bad, in order to determine if his healing is legitimate or if it was done sinfully by the Savior of the world. They brought to the Pharisee the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus, by the way, I would assume that some of these people didn't know what to do with this story because it didn't fit their equation. Now, the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was the Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. Now, can you imagine the joy that had to have been experienced by the man who could see and the people around him who had for his entire life wished he could see, for his friends, for his neighbors, for the community to which he had become a burden to, and the excitement that was there. And yet, they take him to the Pharisees who are going to decide whether or not the healing in itself is okay, clean or unclean. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Can you imagine that somehow in the midst of things, these people became the kind of people who couldn't celebrate the new vision in the life of this man? The new hope that he had felt, that they had become so miserable in their religious existence that they couldn't celebrate his healing. Others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. What's happening here is the Pharisees are actually judging the Savior of the world's methodology for healing. It's so backwards. Rather than allowing the Messiah to give them the vision of his plan for the world, they're busy, blinded, trying to give the Son of God judgment. So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man and said, "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." Now, this man did not have a theological statement ready in which he would say, "Well, I think, he's the Messiah. He's got to be from God." No, this man's only experience was that he was blind, and then he saw. He said, "I think maybe he's a prophet." Like, he was trying to make sense of his event. Jesus had not said, "You'll know immediately who I am." Jesus just healed him. He didn't know everything about Jesus, but he had certainly had an encounter and a meeting with Jesus. And that meeting, just like any meeting with Jesus, began to transform his view of Jesus, and it began to transform his view of everything. They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one that you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" We know he's our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age, he'll speak for himself." Now, I think the parents did this because the religious people of the day and the Pharisees had become so nasty that they didn't want to risk being deemed unholy or to blame, and they were just trying to stay out of it. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. How sad that the leaders that were ultimately supposed to be representing God had operated in a manner to cause fear to the people God loved, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That's why his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." So a second time, they summons the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." It was a little manipulative of the Pharisees, like, make sure you tell everybody he was wrong. It's awful hard to tell God that he's wrong when you know what he did when you were in his presence. He replied, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know is I was blind, but now I see." That's the power of the story of our encounter with God. Don't ever let anyone dim the story of your encounter with God, where he changed your eternity, where he changed your vision for your life, where he changed your direction, where he changed your perspective. There will always be religious people who are blinded to the truth. But when you have a relationship and a real encounter with God, he will begin to reveal himself to you. You know, I find it interesting that Jesus did not sit down with the man and say, "Here are 5 theological points you need to understand about the healing that I'm about to give you." No, the man knew what it was like to be blind. And then he saw, and in light of his blindness, it changed his life. The problem was, this man was well aware of his blindness, but there was a religious blindness in his presence in the religious people of his day. They were blinded. The Messiah was right in front of them, and they missed it. The movement of God that they had been waiting on for so long was right in their presence, and they missed it because they were more in love with their vision of who the Messiah would be than the Messiah who actually was. They asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I've told you already, and you did not listen." I love this. I love this phrase from this man who literally is seeing and used to be blind. I think it's an incredible tool that we need to learn as Christ followers. We tell people, we share our story, we share the goodness of God, but sometimes other people will close their heart to what God is doing because they'll see you as unworthy. "Why do you want to hear it again?" he asks. And he's really leaning into the real motives. Like, you've already made up your mind you don't want to listen. You don't really want to hear what happened to me. What happened to me is that I was blind and now I see. But what you care about is all the details about my healing and whether or not my healing was legit. Do you want to become his disciple too? Now, he asked this as a joke. He was trying to say, "Oh, you want to know so you can follow him?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple, and we are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes." We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? They hated that his identity was now a man of vision. Because when he was blinded, he couldn't see through the fact that they were the blind leading the blind. And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? You know what I love here? Jesus knew the evil that had happened to him at the hands of religious people. And Jesus so cared that he came for a second meeting with him. Because Jesus wasn't just trying to make him see, he was trying to make him whole. He said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man's not sure, so he asked an obvious question. Who is he, sir? The man said, tell me, so I may believe in him. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you. I love this. Jesus gives life vision to the man that he gave visual vision. When you have an encounter with Jesus, he will give you a vision of who he is, and the vision of who he is will direct the rest of your life. You've now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. Jesus reveals to this man, not the religious people, who he really is. You know why? Because this man was open to learn who Jesus really was. Not who their grandma and grandpa told them, but who Jesus really was. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Now notice, the man's only step of faith at this point is that he went and washed his face, and that he told the truth. He stepped into belief, and that belief led him to worship. All of the Pharisees around missed worshiping him while he was here. But the blind man who he gave vision to worshiped. Then Jesus said, for judgment I've come into the world so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind. Jesus is turning things upside down. If these people are bent on not seeing me, I will show myself to those who are blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, what, are we blind too? And the answer is yes. Jesus said, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. You know, Jesus says, you knew better than this. You ever think about how this man's life was altered by this moment? Like, kind of helpless, left to waiting and hoping for others to take him places and take care of him. And he meets Jesus and he becomes a new creation with a new vision. When you meet with Jesus, it changes everything. The evidence of a meeting with Jesus is a changed life. Friend, there are so many lessons to this vision meeting. God has a vision for your life. And if you are willing to encounter him, he's willing to heal and make you whole and give you a clear vision for your future. I love you, Bethel. Have a great week.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Are you ready to take your next step? We would love to hear from you. You can send an email to hello@bethel.us. You can send us a message on Facebook, or you can let us know in the Bethel app. And speaking of the Bethel app, take a moment, if you haven't already, to go to your app store and search Bethel Putco to download our app. There's all kinds of great resources in the app. You can listen to messages, you can view the messages for Sunday morning, and you can also fill out a digital Connect card. You can do that today and each week to let us know that you're tuning in. You can also find some great information about our Bethel Kids Ministry and our Be the One student ministries. Also in the app, you can give. It's one of 3 ways you can give. With online giving at bethel.us/give, in our app, Bethel Putco, or through text. Hey, thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great day and know that you are loved.